Hi, I'm Scott Beibin. And yeah, this right over here, I'm about to show you, is the latest prototype of the Mandelbot Surfa 2. Surfa is the Scalable Universal Robotic Frame Assembly. So while this might look like a 3D printer somewhat, it's a little more than that. And so, behold. And finally, okay. So what are we looking at here? And why are we here right now? And how did it come to be that a stage performance that went to festivals and like kind of anarchist spaces, psytrance events and things like that, how did it come to be that a bicycle-powered science comedy vegan cooking show where audience members use brain-computer interface to make 3D printed organic vegan snacks on a bike-powered 3D food printer, how did it come to be where we wind up having a scalable machine like this that's also describable in smart contracts and all that other stuff? So I will tell you. Okay. So back in about 2010, I started this thing called Scientists Started the New Rock Stars. I was touring around with it, and it gradually changed its name to Groucho Fractal. And I came up with this idea to basically like have all these like crazy technologies duct taped together, and I looked for ways of doing it, and then I realized like these things don't exist yet, and so thus began the large quest in terms of making it happen. And one of the most important things that I figured out very early on is that in order to make very complex things happen, it's really important to break apart all of these different things into components that either you know what you know and you know what you don't know, right? And for those of us here who've built things before and kind of have thought through things, part of that ideation of problem solving is breaking things down into the smallest atomic parts, like addressing each one of those things, and then finding out how do you learn about this thing if there's no documentation out there yet, or are you if you can't find what you're looking for on things like GitHub or on Wikipedia or in different places like this, where do you go? And part of that is in the hacker scene is like just going and meeting people, going to hacker conferences, speaking to academics who are working on similar kinds of things, and just really getting yourself out there. And that was one of the realizations, is just basically trying to ask the best and the brightest people who are working on things how they might envision how things might work. And so that was one of the things that helped me put together Groucho Fractal. And part of the show was basically figuring out how to create ecologically friendly technologies that also respect the freedom and autonomy of the user. So I guess if if you go around and you look at solar panels, for example, which are kind of ecologically friendly technologies, one of the things that's problematic about it is that sometimes these are tied to electric grids that are also controlled and governed by people who might have political interests that are very different than your own, like ones that you might find particularly toxic. And so there's this concept of being off-grid. Now, I happen to live off-grid in Philadelphia. I'm off the electric grid, I'm off the water grid, and I'm trying to solve all those different types of problems. So part of it also is like that I want to encourage you guys to think about is like throwing your entire life into the experiment and not worrying about where the budget is or whatever. It doesn't cost anything to think. Even if there is not a budget for a thing, it doesn't mean give up. It doesn't mean stop doing it until there's money there. No, if you're really passionate about a subject, just keep on researching, keep on finding things out. Sometimes like the money is like great and it's just, you know, icing on top of the cake. But really, what it's really all about is it like in the Web3 space, basically what we're doing is activism for decentralizing a lot of power and like figuring out ways of sharing power. So let's see, I have a few more minutes left. What I wanted to do is like really figure out how to make a low power 3D printer that also printed food and was, you know, that had a whole bunch of different parameters. And so my friend Travis said to me that that this project is feature creep and scope creep embodied. And I guess in, you know, in companies, we, you know, like people discourage having feature creep and scope creep because you'll never get to the end of what you're trying to develop. Well, I happen to take a lot of pride in trying to figure all this stuff out. And so my hobby and what I threw my entire life into was like figuring out how do I create a scalable machine, like one that you can change the dimensions, that is also foldable, lightweight, super durable, made with off-the-shelf parts, kind of like a, you know, like a RepRap 3D printer, where you can have multiple tool heads. This one's called the Goostruder on here. It was designed initially to print with almond butter. Mandel in German is almond in English, and Mandelbrot. Benoit Mandelbrot is the mathematician who described the Mandelbrot set of fractals. So it's a little bit of a tribute to Benoit Mandelbrot, speaking of fractals. And yeah, you'll even see that in the logo and the folding body. But yeah, it's all off-the-shelf parts. It's all like very simple, simple design primitives. And yeah, and I'll have it outside after if you have more questions. Yeah, I guess it's just like if you create a set of parameters, like there were 32 different parameters for this thing, like that it had to be also very repairable. It had to be the type of thing that people could build on because, you know, it's supposed to be an open source project. Yeah, that's yeah, I guess that's a lot. That's a lot of the concept. So basically, the way that it came from, that's kind of like humble beginnings, you know. And well, I guess it was like, I don't know if it was so humble, but it was pretty ambitious. Wound up actually like creating this thing, and one of the things that I've been very interested in throughout my entire adult life is horizontally organized systems. Basically, how do we share power in the society? And that's one of the things that has kept me very interested in the Web3 space and like kind of coming to these types of events because I get to meet other people with very similar ideas because it's like kind of like the frontier of where this kind of creative thought comes from. And I thought to myself like, okay, well, if we have this object, people make it, how can I make it so that we're getting away from the environmental destruction that happens as a result of the globalized manufacturing and distribution of like of electronic goods, or you know, everything from mining and extraction to making the widgets and then shipping them all around the planet and packaging, like the whole thing. How do we get away from all that stuff where the environmental impact is not calculated really, not calculated properly in the impact? And so what I came up with is this idea of making a machine that can be described in smart contracts that people can make anywhere in the world, that's made with really cheap parts, that's super robust. People can create DAOs around each one of them, and those DAOs can be organized as collectives and co-ops and whatever. Yeah, and so this is the, I guess this is part of that thought experiment that I decided to dive into and throw my entire life into. So yeah, and I wanted to thank you guys. I'm at 10 minutes right now. I wanted to give a huge thanks to Stellar Magnet over here, the amazing, for pulling this all together, and and the rest of the crew from Autonomous Ecologies. You guys are super amazing. I wanted to thank you guys for coming and making it thoroughly worthwhile to come out here. If you have the chance, please thank all the volunteers who are here. If you run into them, everyone is volunteering. The event barely is at the break-even point. If you feel like making a donation, please talk to Stellar afterwards. And yeah, yeah, thank you guys so much. And if you have questions, I'll be outside. Thank you.